Hello and welcome to Storylines, the Women's Cricket Podcast. I'm Nikki Chaudhuri, and today alongside me, I'm not joined by Melissa Story, I'm joined by Simon Hughes. Simon, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us.
I'm sorry, it's the beast rather than the beauty today, but it's good to have followed the game, and I've got some thoughts about the women's test and the women's ashes and so on. So good fun to be with you.
Thanks. Yeah, so we're going to quickly run through what happened. Well, it's safe to say Australia have been completely dominant from the get-go of this Ashes series, but at the MCG, well, Australia have won by an innings and 122 runs. England bowled out for 148 in their second innings. And I think it's safe to say it's been the Alana King show, hasn't it?
Oh, I mean, absolutely, yeah. It's uncanny for me, actually, to watch it when I've been at the MCG so often to see Shane Warne dominating England, a great leg spinner. And Alana King, is almost like a sort of carbon copy, a female version. I mean, she's absolutely fantastic bowler, bowling a lot from the Shane Warne end at the MCG. And I sort of feel sympathetic towards many of the England batters today because I don't know how they could have played those deliveries better. I mean, someone like Sophia Dunkley's delivery was a Shane Warne special, that a bit like the ball of the century. I mean, it pitched outside leg, spun across, hit the top of the off stump. You needed a bat twice as wide to play it. I mean, just absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, they are calling it this ball of the second ball of the century, aren't they? But with that Dunkley delivery, I will actually just touch on it. I think it was a great delivery from Alana King, but there are certain bits of the way, perhaps, I think Sophia Dunkley went to play that technique-wise. Growing up, I've been told if you're playing against leg spin, you never take your front foot outside the line of the ball because it's a no-go. It's batting 101 against leg spin, especially when they're taking the ball away from you. What does Dunkley go and do? Foot outside leg stump and boom. But yeah, there's no discredit to the fact it was an absolute beauty of a delivery.
I mean, I suppose what it's done, overall, especially the Test match, but to a lesser extent the one-day games as well, is they've exposed a chasm in ability between England and Australia, and I sort of think that is forgivable. I mean, we can delve into this a bit more, but I sort of think it's forgivable because the Aussies have been playing, professional cricket for so much longer, and I think they have bowlers in particular, batsmen batters who want to just bat and bat and bat, and they have a sort of ruthlessness about it. And they've obviously been brought up on good pitches to be able to trust the bounce and so on. But the bowlers do something with the ball. And if I was to be a little critical of somebody like Sophie Ecclestone, it's just that, she's a fine bowler. She's very accurate. But I think it exposed the fact that the English bowlers in the main don't turn the ball much. And you've got Alana King and Ash Gardner really spinning the ball quite significantly, putting a lot of revs on it. And I suppose it's exposed the fact that in English women's cricket, and you can argue this or whatever, but I haven't seen spinners who really turn the ball. I've seen slow bowlers, but there's a difference between spin and slow bowling, and that's what I think the Australians have illustrated.
No, I completely agree, and especially today towards the end when you don't see it often, but in women's test cricket, you've got girls around the bat, you've got Ash Gardner bowling, and the ball's bouncing quite a decent whack. You don't normally see that. Do you think, to some essence, there is truth to what John Lewis said about the whole culture and obviously the weather and climate being in Australia? Yeah, you're used to, I think we discussed this offline as well, that in Australia you're growing up on good wickets, so you have to have a good minimum basic technique so that you can hold your own. Whereas potentially, if you look at even like age group county cricket, safe to say in England, you're probably playing on cabbage patches. So as long as you can clear mid-wicket, you're not really challenged much until you're playing on a good surface, the ball's coming on, and then suddenly you're exposed a little bit more.
I mean, you obviously talk with a lot of experience of that. I mean, I've seen quite a bit of girls' cricket, women's cricket, and I've seen the same sort of scenarios as you're talking about. I mean, I feel a little bit sorry for John Lewis. He was ridiculed for saying, it was all about culture and athleticism and so on. But I sort of know what he was getting at. And I'll give you a kind of example of what my experience was playing a couple of seasons of club cricket in Australia, both in Perth and also in Sydney. And just to give you an example, in Perth, we would turn up for nets twice a week. This is just an amateur team. We would turn up for nets twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursday evenings, and we'd have hard, really tough net sessions for about an hour and a half to 2 hours on very good net surfaces, fast, bouncy net surfaces. Then we had to run up the hill to the pavilion, which was on the top of a bank, sprint up that hill 10 times. This is after nets. And then we'd go to the beach, which was sort of half a mile away, jog to the beach, do some sprints on the sand, swim out in twilight to a buoy and swim back like a sort of mini triathlon, and then, crack a few beers open when the light had gone and it was, lovely temperature. And that's what we did twice a week for virtually the whole season. And, I had, in fact, the best county season after that winter. And I imagine that the Australian women and men, do that kind of thing just by nature. They've got those beaches. Most of the cities in Australia are by the sea. And so there is that sort of beach culture where you're running and you're playing beach volleyball and you're playing beach tennis and you're swimming and you're surfing. It's part of their culture. And I think it breeds better athletes. And you can just see that in the way they move. And that is a big advantage, which has a physical impact on the game, but also a psychological impact, because you feel that pressure of those very good athletes round the bat and in the field and with the ball. And I think it does have a big influence on what happens in the match.
No, I understand where you're coming from, but surely there's a bit more to it in terms of you don't lose 16-0 just because of that, right? Like Tammy Beaumont's top scored for England today, 47 off 124 balls. And then it was followed by Heather Knight with 32 off 75. You can't, yes, the fitness plays such a huge, crucial element, but your skill set needs to be at a certain standard to then the fitness enhance it, right? So your skill, that science and comes together more so. So just if I were to throw the responsibility into your hands, how would you analyze this? Like, what would be the next steps? Because there's a World Cup later on this year.
Well, I think that, where it comes from in the end is an atmosphere of excellence, and the domestic cricket in Australia, with a lot more professionals and a lot more time that they've been professionals as well since, I think, 2017. So therefore, they're hardened players, they're toughened players, they've had a lot of match experience playing against good standard opposition. And that's what we need in England. And I feel sorry that, the county system got rather dismantled for women's cricket. And there's now, the 100, which is obviously a good standard, but it only lasts for about 3 weeks. And then really the rest of the summer is a bit randomly, sort of arranged with, I know, Charlotte Edwards Cup and so on. But a lot of the best players are playing for England in various competitions. So the standard of the other tournaments, apart from the 100, is probably not that high. Therefore, you're not really pushing people, extending people, testing people, pressurizing players in, high quality, high class environments. Therefore, they don't improve. And that's one of the reasons probably why there hasn't been an influx of talented players to sort of push out the experienced core of this team, because there's no contenders coming in, because the standard of women's cricket in England at domestic level isn't high enough.
And do you think that's probably as a result of there being so much back and forth with the structure in the first place, from regional now going back to county?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, it's just they've dismantled what I felt was a reasonable structure, county structure, and gone to the sort of regional system instead. Now that I know they're sort of planning this tier thing, and I think that'll be good, but it'll take 5 years to kick in.
Yeah, just wanted to move on to Australia's batting innings. Beth Mooney overnight was 98 not out, and she became the first Australian woman to score a century in all 3 formats of this Ashes series. Annabelle Sutherland also scored 163 in Australia's innings. But Simon, when you watch the Australians bat, they look so much more game aware. And I don't want to use this comparison because I know a lot of people will say you shouldn't compare men's cricket to women's cricket, but a lot of them bat like a bloke. There's a lot more awareness with the way it's shot selection. And if I compare it to England's shot selection, it's when England seem in trouble, they're down on one knee looking to slug sweep. And I think it was close to a good chunk of the wickets today went for England whilst they were just trying to get out of a pickle and get out to sweep. What's the difference? Why do we see that? Like I just find it a bit confusing, because I know people will say, oh, you shouldn't compare the men's game, it's a completely different game, but batting is batting, right?
Mm. Yeah, and I think your point is absolutely right. I mean, when I look at the Annabelle Sutherlands and Beth Moonies and, Elise Perry and all those, when I see them play, they play with a lot of top hand and the left elbow, the front elbow upright, and they hit the ball down the ground cleanly. I mean, obviously they've got other shots, but you can see they've been brought up on good pitches where they can hit the ball on the up with a good top hand, a strong top hand. And obviously they can play the pull shots and the cut shots, and their footwork is good, but they are able to play orthodox straight drives and so on, which a lot of the Australian men, were also very good at. I was speaking to Graham Gooch the other day, the famous England batsman the other day, made more runs in the game than anyone else. And he said his favourite shot was the on drive, and that's a hard shot to play on a dodgy pitch, because the ball bounces unevenly and, or lifts or whatever, or moves or stops or something, and you get caught. So you end up having to play with a cross bat with more bottom hand, which is what I think more of the England women's players do. I mean, over time, you've got the Heather Knights and Tammy Beaumonts who have more of a top hand game, but a lot of the players are very bottom handed. I mean, Maya Bouchier is one, for instance. I mean, she's had a difficult tour. She played a lot of cricket with my daughter, and I saw her a lot growing up. And she was always a very bottom-handed player, and she was very good. But she played the pull and the cut very effectively, but she wasn't so good down the ground, and she's been found out sort of technically, I think, in this tour. So you're right. I think that the way the Aussies bat is a bit more orthodox, actually, and a bit more like the men's game, and it's largely because of the fact they play on good pitches. And, they're able to trust the bounce and play fairly orthodox shots, and they like to stay in as well, because the pitches are good that they play on, the grounds are good. They can bat for a long time, and they love it.
So surely that's going to be that would forever be a problem then in the English setup then, because we're not used to playing on good wickets, right? You go and play on a Saturday, you play your club cricket on a Sunday. You're quite lucky if you get a surface that's pretty reliable. So surely that's always going to be the case, because that getting good pitches means more investment, good groundsmen, and the whole shebang that comes along with it. So are you basically saying we're always going to have that gap?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think, we're at an interesting point in the game, aren't we? I think it's a seismic moment in the game where the franchises, the 100 franchises, are being sold for a lot of money, and we could end up with 400 or 500 million into the domestic game. Well, some of that money is going to percolate into the women's game. And the women's sport, I think, is projected to grow by 30% in the next 5 years, sort of from a value point of view. That's a survey I read the other day about global sport. And so that means, investment in women's cricket and women's sport generally is going to be very productive, and therefore there will be a lot of it. And that will just help massively. You've got to get the women playing on good quality county pitches, on the men's grounds as much as possible, or club grounds. I think as time goes on, we'll see more hybrid pitches as well, even in amateur cricket, which will help the predictability of those surfaces. So I think it's not all doom and gloom. I think there'll be some major changes and major moves forwards for women's cricket in England, but it'll just take a bit of time.
Yes, and after a horrific defeat of 16-0, there's always bound to be some sort of changes in the camp, be it management.
Yeah, what's your view? I mean, do you think heads will roll here?
Well, my question is, if we're looking at captaincy, I don't see anyone in my eyes who's potentially able to fit into those shoes quite immediately. I don't think there's been that succession planning, and I think Melissa and I have discussed it previously. So that's quite a difficult one, but 16-0, you can't leave things unchanged, can you?
No. I mean, I think they have to change, definitely. I think Heather Knight's tried her best, and she's an incredibly honourable woman, and she's a very good player. I think she has to give the opportunity to someone else to captain now. I don't know who that is. It is not easy to figure it out. I'm quite impressed. I tell you who I really liked on this tour, actually. I mean, too young to be captain, but Lauren Bell I thought did really well. And also, actually, Filer as well. What's her first name? Lauren Filer,
Lauren
is it?
Tyler.
Yeah. I thought Lauren Filer as well was really impressive. The way she kept going when Australia were piling up all those runs in the Test match, she kept coming in. She kept bowling, a heavy ball. I think she's really improved her action so that she now stands a bit taller at the crease when she lets go of the ball and gets a bit of extra bounce. And I just thought her attitude and the way she spoke afterwards was really excellent. And she tried her best with the bat as well. So, I think there are some positives to come out of this tour, and Bell and Filer would definitely be too. But the captaincy-wise, I think they do need to find somebody new, just because the weight of the burden of defeat must be really weighing heavily on poor Heather Knight's shoulders.
No, I completely agree. I feel very sorry for her. After a 16-0 defeat, Australia are triumphant over England, and that is the end of the Women's Ashes series, wrapping up the test, the iconic test at the MCG by an innings and 122 runs. And I'm sure there'll be lots more discussions later on throughout the next few days and trying to see what happens in the England camp. But as for now, I believe a lot of these girls are going to be flying out to India for the Women's Premier League, which begins in just a few days. And I'm pretty sure Melissa and I have some plans on bringing some content your way as well for that. So Simon, thank you so much for joining us. I am sure we will have you back on the pod very soon. And thank you so much for insights. But as for now, we will love you and leave you. Bye.
Bye.